Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for inviting me, Tom. It is a great pleasure to be here, a real honor. And before I begin, I want to answer the one question that you will all have on your minds. I am wearing a neck suit. It's £200. The fabric is made in Italy, flown to China, made in China, bought back on a boat, and sold in a shop near you or online. It's important that you know that. The honor of being invited to speak in such a wonderful cathedral is a poignant moment for me, and you might not think it's remarkable, but as the great-grandson of a Jewish immigrant, a practicing Jew myself, to be invited to speak in a cathedral says something remarkable about this country. And the fact that none of you think it is remarkable makes it all the more remarkable. It's so easy to take for granted in economic recession and difficult times. It's so easy to take for granted the wonderful things that we have in this country. And if I'm allowed, can I just share one story of the man who sings the prayers in our synagogue. He was in Auschwitz. He escaped he was very young. He made his way across Europe and was from pillar to post beaten and treated appallingly, even in liberated other European countries. When he got to Britain, he spoke no English. He had one little piece of paper with an address on it of some distant relations. And he got on a bus, thought he knew where he was going, got off the bus in the wrong place. He was terrified to ask anyone the directions. In the end, he went into a shop, showed the shopkeeper the address. The shopkeeper understood what plight he was in, left the shop, shut it, got on a bus with him, paid for his bus fare, took him to the address that he was looking for, walked him to the front door, made sure he'd got there, and then said goodbye. That is the type of deep-seated decency that we have in this country. I'm not talking about faux political correctness type decency. I'm talking about things that really come from the heart. And I have always felt privileged to be in this country, and seeing the nation that we love in the difficulty that it's in, the difficulties that we have had over the last 6 years, and the challenges we face, worries me. I say pivotal, and we're at that moment now where, to all intents and purposes, the credit crunch is over. The banks are beginning to lend again. Real earnings, the difference between inflation and the rate of growth of earnings, suddenly we have real earnings in this country, something we haven't had for the last 6 years. For the last 6 years, on average, Britain has been getting poorer. It's not actually, as an interesting aside, it's not actually that we've got poorer. It's that we were never as rich as we thought we were when we were spending all that borrowed money. And it's taken us 6 years to get back to a situation where we can afford the lifestyle that we thought we'd got used to all those years ago. But we're back there, and it looks like growth is on the horizon. It's with us even. But there are risks and real dangers. The growth that we're seeing is anemic. We're seeing extremely dangerous and socially destructive house price inflation, speculation. Amazingly, a nation of very short memories in some quarters, but we're already seeing reckless lending against inflated house prices, and a government that is actively encouraging, with a scheme that should be called help to over-leverage yourself, but is in fact called Help to Buy, encouraging people to take 95% mortgages out. So we are at a crossroads potentially, and in my view, we can either go the route of another cycle of needless speculation, borrowing, another crash, or we can go the route of real growth, productive growth. And by growth, I'm afraid, Bishop Rowan, I do mean more. I mean that you cannot have economic growth without more things. Now, in this environment, I realize I can't talk dresses. I was introduced to lots of people, and I'm ashamed to say I can't remember all your names, but I do remember leeks, mushrooms, lettuce, and beetroot. Not one mention of frocks. But without more food than last year, without more production, without more houses, without more dresses, without more services, without more roads, our economy will not grow. So we have a choice. Now we may choose to say, in not Humphrey Bogart style, enough, or we can make a more courageous decision to say more. And if we want growth, then we have to recognize that we have a problem. I realize that I sound a bit like a psychologist when I say that. We have a problem. You know, I'm internalizing it. We're all sharing it. We have a problem that a great number of our institutions, from national government to local government to commentators, are profoundly anti-growth. Now, the real problem is, as with all mental illness, they don't know that they're anti-growth. They would be horrified to be told that they're anti-growth, but they are. And the root of the problem, not all of them, obviously, but the root of the problem is very simple. It is the illusion of a zero-sum gain world. A world that is pessimistic, that believes there's a limited pot, and what matters is how you divide it up. And if you start with that premise, if you start with this world that has limited wealth, and of course 7 years of stagnation merely reinforce that illusion, but if you start with that premise, then everyone who makes a profit is a thief, and everyone who buys something has been robbed by that person who makes a profit. And it's a very dangerous, difficult place to be in. It's a mean-spirited place to be in. It's profoundly misguided. I am going to tell one of my favorite stories, which almost fits in to my speech. It's the story, I'm sure you've heard it. I believe it was St. Martin, who was approached by two men, a greedy man and an envious man. And he said to them, "Whichever one of you speaks first, that one I shall give whatever he asks. To the other I shall give double." Now you can see the problem, can't you? You see the problem brewing here, because the greedy man is thinking, well, I'll just wait. Whatever he asks for, I'm going to get double. Brilliant. The envious man thinks, I would love so many things in life, but I don't want him to have twice as much as me. Eventually, the problem, after hours of silence, is reconciled when the envious man says, "Pluck out one of my eyes." It's not a very nice story, but you know, I apologize. No, I'm in trouble now. I think the dean gave me a scowl. I have to say, a real scowl. He's laughing now, though. It's fine. But it makes a point. You know, what the last 6 years were about in so many ways has been these two economic evils. On the one hand, the extraordinary rapacious greed of the banks moronic, self-destructive greed. But as we come out of the recession, the problem is a reverse one. Not so much of envy, of wanting what other people have, but the belief that somehow if other people have stuff, they've taken it away from you. This is a belief, believe it or not, that is encouraged by economics study. Is there anyone here, just hands up, who is an economist? Good, sorry, I apologize in advance, but I shall speak freely. I got 12 economics books last year and read, and of them, 11 started with something called the scarcity principle. Now, the scarcity principle is one of those terrible lies that sounds so obviously true. And it is this, that economics is the science, the art of allocating limited resources in the face of infinite demand. There's that zero-sum game world again, tinkered with to allow for growth. Now, of course, it's rubbish. There isn't a limited supply. Think of the iPhone. Many people have an iPhone. I have two. I lost one and then found it. And there are over $100 billion worth of iPhones in the world. 15, 20 years ago, there were no iPhones. That is real wealth that has been created. Equally, so the idea that resources are limited is nonsense. Equally, there was no demand for iPhones 20 years ago because they hadn't been invented. And if demand can be created, then it can't start as infinite. One for the mathematicians there. But that terrible myth of limited resources is one that deeply permeates many of our policymakers. And from highfalutin economics theory to a shop in Camberley, a beautiful shop, a new shop that the company I work for wanted to open. It was going to have a great big home department on 2 floors, more fashion than the people of Camberley had seen in 20 years. It was out of town. We were going to keep our little store in town open. And I spoke to the economic development director of Camberley. He was an economist, and he said, no, you can't open a new shop. All it will do is take money away from your other shop, and maybe a few others. Prove that you need this shop. Well, let me just give you the numbers. The numbers are this. The town centre shop took £2 million. After we'd opened the new shop out of town, it went down a little bit. Still profitable. It took £1.5 million. The shop out of town takes £21 million. Wealth had been created. And there is this terrible perceptual imbalance, this inability to see the creative process taking place. Because if I had said to the same economic development director, if I'd said to him, we're not going to open a shop, we're going to close one, he would have had a mild panic attack. He would have said, you can't do that. Jobs will be destroyed. The town centre will be degraded. Local facilities will be lost. Without next, people will leave in droves. Well, he wouldn't say that, but you get the drift of the sort of thought process. So a perceptual imbalance, which is that people understand wealth destruction, but find it very difficult to understand wealth creation. And that's a problem, because what it leads to is resistance to the very thing that all dynamic economies need, and that is change. I'll give you one other example, because it's not just shops. One other example. If I said to you, what would it do to the economy of Great Britain and Cambridge, if the M1 and the M11 and the M25 were all to be shut and ploughed over, what would that do to the British economy? The answer would be catastrophe. People wouldn't be able to get to work, there'd be unemployment, your shops wouldn't be able to get the stock that they need, food wouldn't be able to be delivered, demand would go down, and it's easy for people to understand that, but very difficult for people to understand that opening a new road, a new motorway, let's say, from Cambridge to another not so good university in another part of the southeast, connecting the greatest academic institution in the world with one that's really quite good. I guess I'm playing to a home audience on this one, but I don't know. That would create an enormous amount of wealth. And rather than say, look, roads are horrible, they make noise, they bring pollution, say, don't just say no, say, let us find a solution to this problem. Let us have quieter roads, cleaner cars, sound barriers. It amazes me that in a country that doesn't like the noise of traffic, quite rightly so, we do less than China and India to erect sound barriers which can reduce the noise of traffic by over 50%. Our answer is just to say no, rather than say, let's solve the problem. And this rearguard action can be seen, rearguard action against change, can be seen holding back the most important part of our economy in many ways when it comes to our quality of life, and that is the housing market. The housing market is doesn't just need more homes. In the southeast of England and in London, it is in crisis. We are seeing house prices stretch far beyond the affordability of anyone who doesn't start with a large pot of money, or anyone who isn't prepared to take an enormous risk. And it is unbelievably divisive. Because what it does, house price inflation doesn't create wealth. It's a myth. A lot of people think it does, because when their house goes up, they feel richer. But of course, with no more houses, there is merely a transfer of wealth. A transfer of wealth from those who don't have houses to those who do. From the young to the old. From the north to the south. From the poor to the rich. And despite this terrible problem, we still seek as a nation to ration, brutally ration, the 92% of the country that is not housing. 1% of land, 1% of the land of this country given over to housing would be enough to last us 20 years in terms of demand. It would immeasurably improve the quality of life of people who would be able to give them their children homes with gardens and the space they need. But we won't do it. And it is a terrible absence of an economy's greatest quality. And Bishop Rowan quite rightly pointed out what that quality is. That quality is trust. Faith. Not faith in the small number of officials who decide where people live, where businesses can operate, how much a place can grow, but lack of trust and faith in the sum total of the collective endeavor of the 30 million people working every day of their lives in this country, each one in some small way trying to grow their little bit of the economy. And yet we have a system, planning being the most obvious example, but we have a system where people feel a need for control, an absence of trust, in the one great engine of growth that any great economy requires, and that is the free market. Now, the free market suffered a little bit during the credit crunch, but if we cannot restore our faith in it, then we are doomed to stagnation. We're doomed to constant asset bubbles. But if we can embrace it, if we can attack our economy with a spirit of optimism, the same optimism that built the houses that we love. It's interesting that if you ask anyone what is the architecture that they most like, they will say Georgian, Victorian maybe, Neo-Gothic, Queen Anne, Jacobean, it's Art Deco. Very few, if any, will choose the architecture post-1947, the time that the Planning Acts were introduced and the job of deciding what gets built was taken away from the people and given to the government. If we can embrace that spirit of those Georgian entrepreneurs, people who believed that not only would the new not be too bad, but the new could be better, that the new could be our contribution to history, that we can today build an economy, houses, buildings, businesses, where people will look back and they will say, that was a great time. Turn of the millennium, those guys knew what they were doing. Of course, there are risks. There is always risks in trust. And we have a choice whether to take that risk or not, whether to promote that risk or not. For me, we can either risk success or guarantee failure. And I'm going to draw on someone who wasn't necessarily an economic figure, but a great political figure, Nelson Mandela. What Nelson Mandela said is that when he came out of prison, he had a choice. He could either trust de Klerk or not. If he chose not to trust him, he was guaranteed to fail. If he chose to trust him, he had a chance of success. I prefer risking success than guaranteeing failure. I'd like to finish by saying that I know some of what I've said, if not all, will be profoundly disagreed with. And I don't mind. I don't mind that. What I hope I've done is to at least spark some thoughts, some questions. And I would like to thank you profoundly, however much you disagree with me. In fact, the people who disagree with me, I would like to thank you more. Thank you so much for giving me the time to talk to you this evening.